I think the best practice here is I need to close every other application that's open on my computer. So anyway, we're gonna watch just the first part, the first 5 minutes, because he hits on two different things, and I think it would be better to have a discussion between the two. So he's going to talk, and just some things to listen for. He's going to talk about open loops and collecting open loops. And he's also going to talk about what he thinks, what his hypothesis for what is the cause for anxiety and stress. And so with that, I am right here. Oops, I need to share my screen. Okay, can you all see this?
Yep.
In this series, we're unpacking 7 timeless time management principles from the life of Christ to help us all be more purposeful, present, and productive. Let's dig into principle number 2, let your yes be yes. And of course, this principle comes directly from the mouth of Christ. Jesus commanded his followers to let their yes be yes and their no be no, plain and simple. Why? Because when we are keepers of our word, we are the very best reflections of the word, Jesus Christ. The problem is, we're saying yes to a million different things in a million different places today in our modern context. We've got starred emails reminding us of a to-do we have. We have Post-it notes and text messages and social media DMs, all representing things that we've said yes to that we know we need to do. And oh, by the way, maybe the main place where all of these to-dos are stored are in our brains. Rolling around in our head are all of these things we know we need to do. The problem is, all of this stuff rolling around in your mind is creating a phenomenal amount of anxiety and stress. I call these things, these to-dos rolling around your brain or your email inbox, open loops, which I define as anything big or small, urgent or distant, personal or professional, that you have any internal level of commitment to do. That could be, oh, I promised my kids I'm gonna make them Minnie Mouse pancakes on Saturday. Or it could be something as big as, oh, I gotta turn in a draft of that proposal to my client by the end of the week. Big or small, urgent or distant, personal or professional, your brain makes no distinction between these things. That's why we're so stressed. It's a huge source of our anxiety and stress today because we know we don't have a plan for extracting these open loops out of our mind and our email inboxes, etc., and into a trusted system. Here's the good news. There is a beautifully simple practice that you can start doing right now to get all of these open loops out of your mind and to ensure that your yes is yes more times than not. Here it is. Here's the practice. Collect your open loops. Literally, take out a piece of paper or a digital to-do list and write down every single thing that comes to your mind, following that open loop definition. Again, anything big or small, personal or professional, urgent or distant, that you have any level of internal commitment to do. Just write them down. And I can almost guarantee that when you get to the end of that list, you're gonna feel some semblance of peace, even though you never did a single thing. I think we've all experienced this at one time or another, especially in really hectic seasons of life. Maybe it was a week before your wedding or a couple of days before you left the office for vacation. You were so overwhelmed that you simply had to make a to-do list. So you sat down, you made the list, you got to the end, and you felt peace. Again, even though you didn't knock out anything off of that to-do list. So do that right now. Collect your open loops out of your email inbox, out of your brain, onto a central list, Number one, you're gonna be a lot less anxious about those things. And number two, you're gonna be in a much better position to ensure that your yes is yes, just as Jesus commanded us to do. All right, that's principle.
So that seems so simple, like the idea that everything's rolling around in our head, and if we write it down, it will release an anxiety. What did you guys think about that?
I do that frequently in the middle of the night if stuff is swirling around my head that I have not put to rest before I tried to go to bed. I will get up and write it down so that I can release it and maybe go to sleep. So I definitely see the practical value of that.
Awesome.
I used to do that, and then I learned to do it at night or, in the afternoon to plan the next day. But even hearing this, I'm thinking about all of my open loops, and I'm sitting here jotting them, I'm starting to jot them down because I do have like the major things I want to accomplish the next day, but I have all these other little things that are kind of taking up space in my brain. So I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, my husband John has been doing it for decades, and it really works. That he doesn't have all that stuff stored in his brain, but it is annoying because if I ask him something, he has to go back and look at his notes. So for me, it's annoying. For him, he doesn't have all that stuff rolling around in his head nonstop. So yeah, it works.
Awesome.
I do that. I've got mine here. So the other thing Nancy and I did several years ago is we took the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, where you put it into the urgent and important, urgent and not important, urgent but not important, whatever those 4 quadrants are. And that really helps me, but definitely write it down and try to prioritize it. Helps me.
Kevin, what app do you use? You held up your phone, but that could be so many things.
This is a notepad. I just put it right in a notepad. It's just the list that I just write it on. That's it.
Okay.
I use Google Calendar. I don't know if anybody else uses that. I have 2-3 calendars for different tasks. Yeah.
Yeah.
I own 2 companies. So I would be completely lost if I did not have my literally bullet point every 15-minute activities. They even make notebooks. You can do a bullet point day-to-day 15 minutes.
How do you coordinate 2
15.
calendars?
Huh?
If you've got 2 calendars, how do you?
I have 3. They're all digitally combined with different levels.
Oh, okay.
It's sort of like the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's funny you said that. I'm actually reading that right now in my spare time. I haven't gotten to that part yet. I'm still working on the character development side.
Well, I thought I heard some Franklin planner people too, because in the old days you'd write down what you were going to do in the day, you'd cross them off, they had symbols, and then if you didn't get something done, you put the arrow on it that you were going to put it on the next day. So Franklin planner was really good at that too.
There's something that he recommends in the book. Maria, do you remember what that is?
Looks like Lene is saying the to-do list. I don't have the book.
The 7 Habits book, or which book are we talking
No,
about?
the book that the study's based on.
Which I don't have.
Yeah, redeeming
okay.
your time.
Most of us don't.
I'll see if I can find it in here. I was kind of cramming before the start.
All right, I'm going to be your contrarian here. I have tried doing this data dump of open loops. I love my spreadsheets. I have put spreadsheets together with different levels of priorities. I've used Google Sheets to categorize and sort, and it's turned into such an overwhelming thing to keep up with all of my open loops. It's like that is a full-time job to track, write down, track, prioritize my open loops to the point where it's analysis paralysis.
I like that.
I got the impression he was saying, just write it down so you can let it go, not necessarily that you have to do anything else with it, but get it out of the worry center of your mind more.
Yeah.
And kind of like when you take things, write them down and then burn them, to get rid of them. I got the impression he was more suggesting that you're releasing it from your mind having to worry about it.
Right. Well, that's the part of the lesson that I need to learn.
I'll hold up my primitive. This is not this is what I was doing before the meeting. And what I find is that my difficulty in, as Paul was saying, we haven't, moving here with COVID, in some ways my life is pretty simple, but there are enough things going on that I find it's easier for me to keep adding to my list, but it's very hard for me to ever scratch anything off and feel like it really is scratched off, because I feel like, oh, well, okay, I've got it off, but then I need to make sure that I record the number somewhere or do this or put something else. And it's just, I think that whole thing about lists is really tricky. Just writing it down for me doesn't just make me feel, oh, good.
One of the books that I've come across was Getting Things Done by David Allen. And he takes list making a step further. He says the list is not going to accomplish the mission. What you need to do is take those items on the list and identify what is the next step. What's the next thing you have to accomplish to make that task? I've got filing on my desk right now tonight that I really should look at. No, I'm not turning the camera around to see it. And if I were keeping an accurate list, the next thing I need to do to accomplish that is get some file folders. And that's what he would say. The list is important, but you need to then identify what is the next action required to accomplish that particular mission.
Mhm.
I can't help reflecting on how far removed much of what we're talking about is right now from reality as I knew it as a college teacher. I don't know how many of you remember your college years, but as a long-term professor, this is this kind of cycle of the semester. A semester is 15 weeks, and everybody knows from the first day in September that final exams are in December before Christmas, and the papers are due after Thanksgiving, and all of this kind of stuff. But you walk around campus the first week in September and everybody's out playing Frisbee and going out for coffee and just having a grand old time, and the library's empty. And then you go into the library Friday before finals begin. Every seat is taken, every computer is going click, click, click as fast as people can click. They're all writing their papers and they're doing good work. But, sometimes maybe that actually works better. I remember my own student years. I did my best work 24 hours before something was due. If the papers, I never wrote a paper that far in advance, so maybe I would have done good work if I'd done it earlier. But there's something to be said for procrastination and panic as a way to get things done.
I have always worked better with a deadline the day and a half before the deadline.
Yeah.
When you said that you didn't work on the paper until 24 hours before it was due, I bet you did work on the paper up here.
I hope so, yeah.
Because I've make lists of things that I need to do right now and things I need to do long-term. And it does, but I write them down, and then a couple of months later, I'll run across the list. I say, oh, okay. And I check it off. And when I happen to run across something I have accomplished, it does feel good. But for me, making a list of what needs to be finished or accomplished or done does help me. It helps me.
Well, sounds like there's mixed opinions on this. I did this. I usually, like Mary, have a daily to-do list, but these last 6 months, just a lot of things have been going on in my life. And so I did the closed loop thing yesterday, or this morning in my prayer time, and this was my list. All the things in my brain. So I don't know if it made me feel better or not. I look at it and go, that's a lot of things. So Nancy, I don't know, we'll see. But let's go on, because I think the next habit he's going to talk about will really resonate with everyone. So let me share my screen again. It's right here. Yep. Okay. Oh, it's that did it to me. He did that to me last night too.
Ironically, the level of competition
Wrong video. I apologize,
decreases
you guys.
as the size of
Here. Access today.
list and write down. Number 2, collect all of your open loops. Once we've got a handle on all the things that we've committed to do at work and at home, we got to prioritize our yeses. But we can't do that yet. That's principle number 4, which we're going to talk about in the next session. First, we've got to get to principle number 3, dissenting from the kingdom of noise. Why? Because in order to prioritize the many open loops we have to do, we've got to make space for silence and solitude and quiet, just to think about what's most important on our to-do lists. And I would argue silence, solitude, boredom, this is the number one thing at risk of extinction in our day and age. None of us are bored anymore. We have no idea how to be bored. We are constantly intaking news from news websites, social media services, the pinging of our digital devices. All of these external things are creating a phenomenal amount of internal noise that blocks out our ability to prioritize our to-do lists, to think, to be creative, and most importantly, to listen to the voice of God. And if you read the gospel biographies, maybe more than anything, this stands in stark contrast to the way of Jesus. The number of times the gospel writers say that Jesus withdrew to a solitary or lonely place is mind-boggling. And again, this looks nothing like the way we live our lives today. If we want to redeem our time in the model of our Redeemer, Jesus Christ, we have to learn daily habits of dissenting from the kingdom of noise so that we can think and be creative and prioritize our to-do lists. Here's one of those practices. Let your friends curate the news for you. Now, for context, for years, I was a news junkie. I was constantly on news websites. I was constantly spending time on Twitter and social media. But today, I spend no time on social media. I spend no time on CNN.com. I don't watch news. I don't listen to it. Nothing. But here's what happened when I stopped consuming all of this information about 6 years ago. When one of my favorite writers, Tim Keller, announced on Twitter that he had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, 8 of my friends texted me the news within 10 minutes of it breaking. I hear about hurricanes, I hear about race riots, media trends, and every new Taylor Swift album because I'm a huge Taylor Swift fan. And I hear about all of these things without having to spend a single moment wading through the 99% of content on social media and news websites that is, number one, totally irrelevant to my life and my work. And number two, anxiety inducing. Time magazine says that 3 out of 10 Americans say that the news is their primary source of anxiety. We're doing this to ourselves. We're literally making ourselves anxious. How can you stop? How can you dissent from the kingdom of noise to be less anxious, to prioritize your to-do list, to think and be creative and listen to the voice of God? One idea, let your friends curate the news for you. Now, in my book, Redeeming Your Time, I've got 8 other practices to help you dissent from the kingdom of noise. And going back to principle 2, let your yes be yes, I got 4 other practices to help you take those open loops, turn them into well-defined work so that your yes is yes 9 times out of 10. I'm praying that those practices are a blessing to you. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in just 2 sessions. In session 1, we started with the word. Principle 1, start with the word just like Jesus did as we seek to redeem our time. In this session, we examined principle number 2, let your yes be yes, and principle 3, dissent from the kingdom of noise. In our next session, we're going to talk about prioritizing our yeses and accepting our uni-presence, the same uni-presence that Jesus experienced as a human during his time here on earth.
Ooh, look at me looking all weird. Stop the video for a minute, let everything calm down. So I wanted to ask you guys, how many of you agree with Jordan that the news in any form that you consume it is a major source of anxiety in your life?
I get most of my news from the TV, and for me, I can let it run in the background. I don't know. I'll have to leave it off for a couple of days and see if the silence isn't more anxious causing than the background noise of the news.
I have to admit, I'm really uncomfortable with what he said. I was raised to believe that as a responsible citizen, I'm obliged to be well informed. I guess I am a news junkie. I read the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times every morning, and I can't imagine not doing so. It takes a little time. There's certainly a lot of stuff in it that causes anxiety and worry, but it seems to me to cut yourself off from the world is to somehow be irresponsible. I don't think that's what we're called to do. And I like my friends, but they're not what I would trust as a reliable source for what's going on in the world. I hear an awful lot about TCU's bad luck and very little about anything else. And maybe this doesn't make any sense, but just this idea that somehow you should stop watching the news and stop reading the newspaper, I'm very uncomfortable with that.
I think he was a little extreme with it, but I do think one of the things that is striking about much of the news, not all of it, but much of the news, especially I think, more so with the local news, is that it tends to, it's not very newsworthy to have something on about people who have obeyed the traffic laws. But, if somebody's been shot, or if there's been, a killing or whatever. So I think that, and then the fact that I was listening to the BBC the other day, and in some ways it's good to be informed. And I will say that, when they show those maps of the world and they show like China and they say something like, well, 95% of these people who've been taking this quiz don't know what country it is. I think, well, hey, maybe you need to look at a map every once in a while. So, I think there's a way of being tuned out, but as I was listening to him, I was thinking about something more positive. And that is that when our kids were growing up, one of the favorite places that we had was the cabin. And, we were from Minnesota and we didn't have a TV. We didn't have a radio on. And I think that was part of what was so nice about it. And then just an adjunct that not about our family, but I remember hearing a guy who was a professor at MIT saying, when people came back from World War II and they were students who, were older and they were very disciplined and they really got to their work right away. So many people said, oh, these were just wonderful students. And he said, but I think a lot of the best students I've ever had were people who were a little kind of unhinged and a little cut off sometimes and just and I think about Newton, you hear that he came up with gravity when he was sitting under an apple tree and just kind of wondering. So I think there is something to what he's saying about just being cut off and letting your mind wander and not feeling like if you're not being actively thinking all the time that you're somehow deficient. So that's
Yeah,
a bunch of different things, but
So I was gonna say, like, when I listened to it last night and I thought, well, this thing about news could be a little bit controversial. So I want to pivot to that whole thing of making time to get away from the noise. And so some of there was two questions that were posed, and I think it's good to think about this one. There's some sources of noise in your life that you can't control, your kids, you had your kids last week, or that you choose not to exclude, like Paul wanting to read the news, not the noise. But I think one of the questions was to think about what are the noises you're in control of, and there my screen is going crazy. What are the noises you're in control of that maybe if you eliminated would give you more quiet time?
He used the word being bored. I cannot remember. I literally cannot remember the last time I was bored because my brain just is going. And sometimes the news, I get somewhat anxious to it, but I start most of my days reading from a book by a man named John Bailey, and it's called A Diary of Private Prayer. Whenever I have the world's events bothering me, he had a prayer in there that I say, and I say this nearly every day. I will share it with y'all. It says, break down, O Lord, all the forces of violence, cruelty, and evil. Defeat all selfish and power-driven schemes and bless everything that is planned in the spirit and carried out to the honor of his blessed name. When I say that, that turns all of the chaos in the world over to God, and he's going to take care of it. So I don't really get too stressed with what's going on in the world because of that.
This is Mary, and I will just say that I used to be a news junkie, and sometimes I can still kind of fall into that where I just sit and read, and especially when something is going on in the world, I overindulge in reading about it. But it has been beneficial to me personally to limit, not bury my head in the sand and not ignore it, but to limit my consumption of news. I read some articles from newspapers, that I trust and that I personally believe in, and look at some news reports. But so as we were trying to do that exercise last week about putting more time to God, I was limiting myself in the mornings, at least, to like 30 minutes of news. And then I have to wait that long before I can have my cup of coffee after I take my medicine. And then I went to my Bible and started my Bible readings. And it's not that I didn't check the news periodically throughout the day, but I was really trying to do what he said about going to the Word first. But I needed that cup of coffee first. to do that. So it wasn't a perfect week, but it really kind of helped set the tone better for me, to keep my eye on something bigger than what's going on around, the world events. We can't control all of them, but God can. And I certainly added those things that I had heard about to my prayer list. So thank you for letting me share that.
Well, no, that was beautiful. Thank you for sharing. And it really, you did a beautiful job of weaving last week's message into this week's message of limiting the noise in your life to make time for the word. Which was kind of what I was asking, like this, I think maybe this week, if we can pray about, and then we can continue the discussion, but pray about what are the noises I can control, God, that I need to let go of so I have more time for peace. And because I started to think about that when I asked you guys the question, and I was like, oh, I don't know. No, that one I need, So, other thoughts?
I have something. I mean, I'd like to think that it's personal. And the one thing that we all have in common right this minute, right in this hour, is that all of us took the time. We obviously planned around, I mean, I know I did, to plan to take this hour. And then to discuss this is awesome. And for some of us, 5 minutes might be equivalent to someone else's hour, or one day might be equivalent to someone else's 3 days, depending on where we are in our life, we're in our jobs and our families and whatever. But I'd like to think that just the fact that we're discussing it, and then we're listening to this man who took time out of his life, 6 years, to make these changes, to spread this message. Doesn't necessarily mean that we all have to either, do one or the other, or, or and the other thing, at the risk of, I mean, I'm not preaching at all, but I'm just saying that we shouldn't judge if someone is on Facebook or TikTok or Twitter or CNN or Fox News or reading the paper or doing it, whatever works for you. The fact that we're taking this time, we all have this St. Luke's in common. So we all care about Jesus Christ, and we obviously all are in tune to making more time and to managing our time or whatever. So I just thank y'all for that, for bringing that to me, in this 1 hour.
Well, I hope I did not come across as being preachy, because
No, I didn't mean that at all.
We are all in a completely different place. I'm blessed to be retired mostly at this point in my life, so I can sit around with a cup of coffee and my Bible and sit and do that. So if you had asked me 6 years ago, I would have laughed and said, I'm lucky to, listen to it on the, on my podcast on the way to work, fighting traffic. So
I love this.
Yeah, this is a good group.
I don't think anyone was preachy, and I think, for each of us, it's a personal, where we are on our journey is personal, in how we accept last week's challenge of making more time, starting with the word, and this week's 2 ideas of doing your open loop thing. I'm still kind of not sure how I feel about it. And then also getting the noise out. Each of us has to choose, ask God to help us, which noise should not be in our lives, so that we can make more time for quiet. But I think that's something to take to prayer.
Talking about noise for a minute, I can't remember which commentator makes a distinction between what he calls the difference between the signal and the noise. That I think it relates to computers, but there's a lot of data coming through, but not all of it's equally important. And I think for us, each of us has to, in our own way, realize that we're confronted with overwhelming volume of news and noise, and we have to decide for ourselves what's the best way to relate to it. And the lesson we're being taught this week is none of it is the most important thing. There's something far more important that we ultimately need to think about.
I heartily recommend this book. It's really good and goes into a whole lot more than he's able to cover in his videos. It's really, really good.
Awesome.
Just
Well,
need
hey,
time-
oh, sorry, somebody else want to share?
No, I said that we just need time to read it.
Yes.
Oh, put it on the to-do list.
Yes.
Into the Google Calendar.
Yeah.
Just share this reflection as part of our closing prayer, and then I'll stop the recording and take prayer requests. But it was really funny, this session, and I have this book that someone gave us in another Bible study last year called, has anybody heard of Jesus Calling?
Oh, yeah.
This is Jesus Listened by the same author. And today's prayer was written for tonight. Ever near Jesus, you've been calling me to a life of constant communion with you. Part of the training involves living above my circumstances, even when I'm up to my neck in clutter and confusion. I yearn for a simplified lifestyle with fewer interruptions to my communication with you. But you've been challenging me to relinquish the fantasy of an uncluttered world. I need to accept each day just as it comes to me and search for you in the midst of it all. I'm thankful that I can talk to you about every aspect of my day, including my feelings. Help me remember that my ultimate goal is not to control or fix everything around me. It's to keep communing with you. You've been showing me that a successful day is one in which I stayed in touch with you, even if many things remain undone at the end of the day. I must not let my to-do list become an idol directing my life. Instead, I can ask your spirit to guide me moment by moment. He will keep me close to you. Wasn't that like perfect for tonight?
That was really
Yes.
good.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, thanks, Holy Spirit. I've got my closing. Anyway, let's quickly, I know we're at 7:59. Prayer requests. So
Maria, stop the recording.
oh, stop recording. Yes, thank you. Did Gavin and Katie and Elise get back to school?